It's our village. It's our country. It's our bush. That's why I'm always going. If they want to kill me, they will kill me because the team is my friend.
That's the voice of Megari, a field assistant in Nigeria's Gashaka-Gumti National Park, one of the most dangerous places to do conservation work today. This is the Alternative on Africa Talks Network, where we go beyond the headlines to understand how stories are reported, who tells them, and what it takes to bring them to life. And I'm your host, Nelly Kalu. This is a special episode for us actually, because it's the beginning of a new kind of conversation, one that we've always wanted to have with you, that takes you behind the scenes of journalism and storytelling. On The Alternative, we'll be speaking with journalists, filmmakers, and storytellers about the stories they tell, what inspires them, and what happens in the field, as well as the realities that audiences often never get to see. And for this very first episode, I'm joined by Tom Richards, a wildlife filmmaker and documentary producer whose work focuses on conservation and environmental storytelling. I first came across Tom through a Mongabay video investigation titled Defying Conflict to track the world's rarest chimpanzees. The story takes us into Nigeria's Gashaka-Gumti National Park, home to the endangered Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzee, and follows the people risking their lives to protect wildlife in a region shaped by insecurity, poaching, and environmental pressure. Today we'll talk about the story itself, the reporting process behind it, the ethics of conservation storytelling, and Tom's wider philosophy on filmmaking and local storytelling. Tom, welcome to The Alternative.
Hello. Great to be here.
Thank you. I'm happy to have you here. Can you tell us, Tom, just a little bit about yourself, because we'll talk about you a lot more as we go, but also what inspired you to tell this story?
Yeah, sure. So I am a wildlife filmmaker, predominantly, a documentary producer, director. I've spent the last sort of 10 years or so predominantly making wildlife and conservation stories for broadcast television. Over the last year, I've sort of left the broadcast TV world a little bit to focus on independent films. So my passion is, I'm a conservationist first, I guess I would say. That's sort of what got me into this. I believe that there are loads of conservation stories and environmental stories around the world that desperately need telling, and telling in a way that's impactful and sort of helps the conservationists on the ground. So that's my philosophy and sort of where I come from. Yeah, I'm based in Bristol in the UK, which is kind of, I guess, sometimes called the Hollywood of wildlife filmmaking. I don't know what the latest statistic is, but the last one I heard was 30% of the world's wildlife documentaries are made in Bristol. So yeah, that's where I'm based. And kind of also that influences a bit the way that I tell my stories as well, because what I really want to do ultimately is to sort of diversify that away from Bristol. So I also do some work with an organization called Filmmakers for Future Wildlife, and we basically want to sort of not just get stories told from places around the world that don't usually have those stories told, but also sort of build skills and sort of bring in storytellers from that. So that's, yeah, I guess that's a bit about myself and about my philosophy.
Now, before we delve into the story, I want to ask you a little bit more about yourself and your philosophy. As it is, when you've met someone for the first time, especially in this journalism career of ours, you go into their website or their LinkedIn to try to know a little bit more about them. So I went to your website. And your description was, you have a history of producing premium blue chip expedition-based natural history series. And it was very interesting for me to know and to read. I mean, I know of wildlife, recording, producing and stuff like that, but I just didn't know the entirety of the space. You really do a lot of basically high explorative work. Yet, something interesting caught me about your description about your work. It wasn't just that it's high and explorative, it's that you were more interested in making it more equitable, design projects, or at least work with projects that allow you get right in touch with the people around the story and collaboratively. So I think I'm confused in such a way as how one is able to do that, to make this production and the work they do really local, like touch the local spaces, and yet keep it at such high end value? Because I know that's a conflict that happens a lot. How do you solve that conflict? Do production that is so highly competitive and highly structured and still be able to connect it to the local spaces and keep a collaborative and equitable space for production and storytelling? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I guess firstly, I would say I'm on a journey with this. So, and I would consider myself early on in this journey. I think we've got a lot to do as a wildlife filmmaking industry, and that's kind of why I'm so passionate about this. So, for context, so I mean, premium blue chip natural history is, to explain the term a bit more, is kind of what you would think of your BBC Planet Earth, like very sort of animal behavior led. That's your sort of premium blue chip space. It's high budget, it's high skill set. Like everyone is sort of highly specialized, tends to be in that space at filming wildlife using sort of very expensive equipment, and it has historically been quite elitist. So it's historically been, as I mentioned before, sort of Bristol being the Hollywood of wildlife filmmaking. So many of the skill sets are sort of held there, and what me and quite a few others have sort of started to notice over the years, or started to get more conscious of, I should say, is that the model for filmmaking in that space was flying to places around the world, flying a whole camera crew out, telling stories about nature in that place, and then coming back and selling that product globally, which ultimately doesn't serve much for the local people in a lot of ways. A good example of this is Kenya. So Kenya, at the height of the sort of wildlife filmmaking sort of heyday, so I'm thinking sort of pre-COVID, 2018, 2019, I'm sure there would have been at any one time probably 5 to 10 film crews from Bristol in the Masai Mara filming lions or cheetahs or anything else. And yet none of that content would, or very little of that content would make it to Kenyans. I heard from a Kenyan filmmaker called Paula Kahumbu, who said to me and some other people in the Filmmakers for Future community, nobody knows who David Attenborough is in Kenya. And that to me struck me as quite powerful, because it's like, okay, there's crews making stuff for David Attenborough documentaries or similar sort of style of documentaries like in Kenya all the time. Why is that none of that content getting there? So that's kind of when we talk about the sort of equitable filmmaking and trying to get it away from being extractive, because that's what it is, right? Like what's the difference between coming in and sort of mining stories, for want of a better term, and selling them internationally than any other natural resource? So yeah, so I've kind of tried to, as I've sort of moved, I tried to do it within the sort of broadcast TV space. I came up against quite a lot of challenges doing it in that space. I've sort of worked to lobby for it, and I think the space is moving. There are certain companies, the BBC are trying to invest in local camera talent across Africa and Asia, as are quite a lot of the independent production companies in Bristol. But I think there is a long way to go. And so yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to change. And so yeah, for me, so Nigeria is an interesting specific case study or story from my perspective, because it's a country that I know really well. My dad lived there for 40 years. I've been going there since I was 15, and trying to pitch stories, Nigerian conservation stories, to broadcast TV networks and production companies for pretty much my whole career, and getting nowhere with it. And so, yeah, I guess with Nigeria, I wanted to sort of first of all sort of try and get those stories told, and then also in turn sort of hopefully inspire some Nigerians in the conservation space, of which there are loads, to also try and tell those stories and sort of join me on that journey as well. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But yeah, like I say, it's an ongoing journey. There's lots to do, but there's a huge amount of potential to sort of get more local storytelling into that sort of global journalism and filmmaking space.
So how did the Mongabay collaboration come by? How did you find out about this story? Get in touch? I want the journey from pitch to production. Can you give me that in a nutshell?
Yeah, sure. So my co-director and director of photography, Leo Plunkett, is a good friend of mine back in Bristol, and he's done some work with Mongabay before, and he sent me a text saying, Mongabay have got some money for ape stories. Have you got any ape stories? And I was like, yeah, I've got some ape stories. And yeah, at the time, I'd recently left a production company that I've been at for a long time in Bristol called Offspring Films, and I was sort of looking for another filmmaking project, particularly like an independent film for something for the digital space. So I was like, okay, right, I'm gonna research as many stories as I can and come up with some good ape stories. I have a huge passion for West African ape conservation. So I already sort of had a few thoughts, one of which was, Nigeria has two of the world's rarest apes, the Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzee and the Cross River gorilla. So for me, I was like, it has to be one of those two. And so I'd been speaking to the African nature investors guys, Tunde Morakinyo in particular, about doing a story about Gashaka, but trying to find like a format or like a space to put a film about them. So I sort of reached out to him and said, what ape research have you got going on? And he said, well, we don't have much like in terms of like a proper research programs, but you should chat to some of our team and see what they're doing because we're doing some interesting camera trap work. So yeah, then I started speaking to some of the team and I heard through the team about Megari and his story. And so yeah, I thought that's pretty cool that he's sort of been there for so long, studying these apes through lots of different turbulent times in the park, and yeah, kind of grew out from that really.
Megari in this case, of course, is a central character. Basically, the story is told almost from his point of view. Let me say a little bit about the story. And full disclosure, I am Nigerian. Last year, I was editor on a collaborative story on the last rainforest in Nigeria at the Cross River State area. Also sharing boundaries, of course, with Cameroon, crossing over into that, just like this one. I realized that there was an intersection in the problem, the conflict and the issues going on for that rainforest to also be the last and now dying rainforest was the same problems that you highlighted in your story that was leading to the near extinction of these ape species. That is, I think, was going to run through a series of questions for you, because as a journalist, I'm really curious about this. First, this area where Megari works is a conflict zone, is a conflict area. I heard him saying that most of the researchers and research teams were gone and the research hubs were empty and dilapidating. I want to start from looking at Megari also as a central character for this part of our conversation, all the way onto the environment itself. How did you get him to want to talk to you, to trust you, and to share his story?
Yeah, good question. So I guess another piece of context. So in my sort of general staying on top of research, I had met Megari before a year prior. So I visited Gashaka. I was invited there to come and have a look. I've sort of, I guess, over the last few years, just been very actively interested in Nigerian conservation stories and tried to speak to and meet a lot of conservationists in Nigeria just to sort of stay across some of those issues. So I was invited to Gashaka-Gumti the year before, and me and Megari had a really long, and Emmanuel, who also features in the film, had a really unexpectedly long hike over a couple of days where, yeah, we sort of hiked up to the
Why was
highlands
it
of
unexpected?
Gashaka. Because, I mean, the nature of working in such a remote place, we got driven by a tractor sort of into the forest to Kwano Research Station, which you see in the film. And we stayed in Kwano and then hiked up to the highlands of Gashaka, which, as you see from the film and in the sort of helicopter shots, are stunningly beautiful. And I wanted to sort of to experience that hike. Partly I was forced to because at that time the helicopter was not in Gashaka. I think it was either gone for repair or for a service, and yeah, the pilot wasn't around. So we decided to hike all the way up, which for me was great because I was like, I want to see all the different the different types of like sub ecosystem, like the biomes, as you sort of hike to the top of the highlands anyway. But then on our way down, we didn't. It sort of started raining, and we didn't have communications with the tractor to sort of pick us up. So we ended up hiking sort of double the distance that we had intended in a short space of time for me to be able to get back quick enough for me to leave the park in good time for my flight home. So Megari and I had like a hike together, and Emmanuel, where I sort of got to know them a little bit then. I didn't know that at that time that I was going to come back and make a film, but at least I knew who he was, and so when I came back, I was at least a familiar face. But I mean, what I'd say is Megari was so generous with just offering his stories anyway. Like, it didn't take a huge amount of earning of his trust. I think what I always find, in particular, like with Nigerians in that part of Nigeria, is no one is telling their stories anyway. So they're very happy for people to sort of tell their stories, particularly if it's in a positive way. As you'll have experienced, Nelly, like so much of the international coverage of Nigeria is sort of in the news is negative. And so for me to sort of come with, I want to tell a positive story to a global audience, like tends to, I think people get quite excited by that. And then I think also like perhaps my approach, like I very much through my sort of philosophy of trying to move away from like extractive storytelling and trying to be more sort of ethical in my approach, like I very much want people to tell stories in their own style. And so, yeah, sort of let Megari sort of breathe and sort of tell his story in the way that he wanted to, or Leo and I did. And I think that really helped. And yeah, we just sort of had fun with it. And he was, yeah, just very generous in telling his story.
Let's talk about the story itself. For people who haven't seen it, who haven't watched it, tell us a little bit about the story. And could you add a little extra for me as well? Was there anything that that Megari, expressed? Maybe his doubts, fear, fatigue, anything about his work that didn't make the cut. So tell us what we can see and a little bit about what we cannot see when we watch it.
Sure. So yeah, so Megari and Emmanuel both work for African Nature Investors. Megari has been researching chimpanzees in Gashaka-Gumti before African Nature Investors started working in the park. For context, so African Nature Investors are an organization that have a very unique MOU with the Nigerian Park Service that they've sort of brought in lots of resources to help manage Gashaka-Gumti, and that's like a really unique collaboration. So we sort of tell the story of how that has changed the park through Megari's experience, and sort of use that as context to explain what they're doing now. So now Megari and Emmanuel are looking for chimpanzees using camera traps. They're also looking for doing lots of biodiversity monitoring across the park, but we focused on the chimpanzees, and it kind of follows their search for the Nigerian-Cameroon chimpanzee in the park, which is quite a task because it's as you said at the start of the podcast, it's Nigeria's largest national park, and so they use a helicopter to go around and reach sort of some quite remote areas that perhaps people haven't really even been before, if certainly not for a number of years, to look for those chimpanzees. So through that we sort of touch upon a few of the sort of wider conservation issues, why the chimpanzees are endangered. We talk about sort of poaching, and then you spoiler alert, but you see a little bit of evidence of that in the from the helicopter, and then we talk about some of the other issues as well, like herding in the park and mining too. You asked about what's not in the story.
Yes, go ahead.
That didn't make the cut. And I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess we could have we tried to sort of do a bit of delving deeper into things like the mine, but that was quite difficult because it would have been quite a hostile area to go into. So we documented that for African Nature Investors, which was something that was quite important to me as part of my sort of philosophy around impact. But in terms of Megari's story, I think we included everything we could. He sort of, I mean, there's certain aspects, obviously, so we tried to tell a sort of condensed version of the park's history from his point of view. So there was a little bit more in terms of that, in terms of who he worked with and stuff like that. But I think broadly we covered most of his story.
So let me touch on the part that I saw didn't make a lot into the story, and you just hinted on that, approaching the mines and some of the risks there. It's titled, or rather framed as, Defying Conflict. So there was obviously conflict. That's an area that used to be very ridden by Boko Haram terrorists. And, so what was the day-to-day security challenges or conflict challenges you must have dealt with? And did you do any risk assessment before you had to go into the Gashaka-Gumti National Park?
We did do some, sure, we absolutely did risk assessment. The biggest thing for me was I felt safe the whole time just because of the support that we had from African nature investors, and the Nigerian Park Service. I mean, the rangers they have there, I think it's almost up to 100, 180, possibly even more rangers now. So we had rangers with us the whole time when we were shooting, who were armed. And we included their story in the film. There's a lovely scene with Megari talking to one of the rangers, and he sort of tells a bit of his perspective of how the park has changed. But yeah, I mean, I felt totally safe the whole time. I mean, luckily we sort of worked out of the ranger outpost, which is sort of obviously quite heavily guarded and staffed by lots of rangers. So yeah, it was only sort of, I guess, when you go into the sort of more remote areas where perhaps that security situation would have changed. So we decided that it was a bit much to try and go too close to the mine or approach it on the ground. We managed to include shots of it from the helicopter, and the
Yeah,
helicopter
so
obviously gave us that
mhm.
a huge advantage in that you can cover things from a distance, and it still kind of looks cool as well. So yeah, so I guess in terms of risk throughout the whole shoot, I mean, I've done a lot of I've done hostile environment sort of training, but I've also worked in Nigeria in various different areas before and have a bit of, I guess, awareness of security and experience in that space. And yeah, I just didn't. I I think with the support of people that know about security, which African nature investors do, and they're looking to bring tourists into the park at some point, and I think they've already got quite a lot of really good things in place to make you feel safe at every stage. So yeah, the security issues I didn't really sort of feel on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, we did our due diligence, but yeah, I felt very safe and well supported in that respect.
It was very interesting to me to see that the factors that are affecting, like I said earlier, conservation of species in case of animals is affecting the same thing for species in case of flora, like trees and the rest of them. And it's the mining, it's the so-called need for farming, especially for cash crops and massive production, and of course it is the poaching. These ones are what I would say are more internationally recognized dangers. I also am concerned about the traditional consumption of the locals around there. If you live near
Hmm.
a bush, like we call it in Nigeria, like a massive forest, you likely also live on that forest. You eat from the trees, you eat the animals as bushmeat. What about the local consumption habits may or may not affect the conservation efforts being made now? For instance, I imagined in my mind that at the time that it was ravaged by terrorists, they probably killed as many animals as poachers did for meat, survival. They probably did that too to create space, and but that is also sometimes a local cultural behavior to eat out of the forest. For this particular story, did that conflict come up? Like, how are the locals adapting to the need to save these species? And have they moved on from depending on that particular habitat for their survival?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in Gashaka in particular, I mean, Mike Megari's village don't poach in the park, as far as I'm aware. I think, historically that was a real issue, but through a mixture of education and law enforcement, that has massively reduced in that area. Obviously, we sort of talk about in the film the period of instability before, where it was, yeah, and just to clarify, I think it was, I mean, it's unproven, I think, where the Boko Haram actually sort of made it into the park, but it was certainly that destabilization of the region further north drove a lot of banditry. And I think, when that banditry, like you say, was really prevalent in the park, I'm sure that drove, well, it certainly did drive poaching up. These days, I mean, African Nature Investors runs like an education program, like in and around the park, but they also run alternative livelihood programs. And I think that's a real key part of conservation in these areas is, you can't just have the law enforcement to prevent poaching. You have to provide an alternative. Most of poaching in these areas is, it's opportunistic. It's people just trying to make a living for themselves or feed themselves and their families. So I think it's important to sort of realize that it's not a black and white issue. And, I think globally conservation, we're sort of moving away from this idea of fortress conservation where you just sort of keep everyone out of the park and protect everything. yeah, against the sort of benefits of local people, you have to bring local communities with you. And yeah, luckily, like in that region around the park, African nature investors have done sort of sustainable livelihoods work where they're educating people on how to farm in the edges of the park sustainably without damaging the ecosystems, or how to, or the benefits of planting trees in your in and around when you grow your crops and things like that. So yeah, I think for me, like education is key. They're certainly having a lot of making a lot of progress in those areas around the park.
Did you face any ethical dilemmas while filming or reporting? Maybe some in the storytelling itself, or consent, or
Not hugely on this project. I mean, it's kind of luckily, I think, telling this sort of story where it's a positive story about a conservation win by and large. So the fact that Megari and Emmanuel are sort of discovering these new troops of chimpanzees being the focus meant that we were sort of everyone's on the same team, and we're telling a story that benefits everyone. So within the sort of storytelling, there wasn't a huge amount of conflict. I guess for me, I mean, what we did do is we tried to sort of find people within the villages who had previously been hunters. And I think the difficulty in some of those situations is you don't entirely know what's the truth when you're sort of interviewing people. I think when you bring a camera into those sorts of communities, sometimes people want to give you what you want to hear. So I guess that was a difficult one for us. Was we had a couple of interviews with sort of hunters, which we ended up not including in the film because I couldn't verify the truth of them. And yeah, I think that is one of the difficulties is in telling like a balanced conservation story sometimes is trying to find the sort of the opposing view or the counter argument or someone from the other side of someone with a different perspective on the other side of conservation. And that's really difficult. And in the end, we felt we didn't really need it necessarily. But
why?
yeah, that's
Why did you feel you didn't need it?
just because we were focusing on Megari's story, and I think because we saw, yeah, I mean, we saw the poachers from the helicopter, which, yeah, I don't know, it's difficult. I think partly what we did get or we found wasn't useful or wasn't ethical, like I say with interviews that you're not sure on the truth. But then I think in the way that our storytelling worked, we just made it much more about Megari's character and the positivity of making that progress. Like I think you can use I mean, we used News Archive in the end to sort of give the context for those conservation threats. I think if we delved into it and tried to make a longer film and go into the issue a bit more, we would have needed it. But I think for this film and this format, we didn't miss it in the edit.
I really did enjoy the references to news reporting and news, format, news archives that you applied there, because that then created, at least gave some data verification where you didn't have to delve into actual fact checking and explaining the facts. So at least, just jumping off of the journalism that has happened already, move the story along, still providing that credibility anyway. I'm interested in your reflection at this point. What surprised you the most while working on this story?
What surprised me the most? So, I mean, for me, this was a new format for me. Like I'm used to, as I sort of mentioned, like I'm used to working in sort of broadcast TV and sort of much more longer formats. So, and sort of quite heavily formatted programming. So, thinking about the sort of the blue chip work that I've done is very much you have a sequence about one bit of wildlife behavior, then you move on to a next sequence of more animal behavior from a different species. And like the expedition formats that I've worked on sort of follow an expedition. And so this is very different in the style of storytelling. You know, Leo has worked a lot. My co-director has worked a lot more in this space, so I learned a lot from him in that. But I think what I found surprising is the sort of I really enjoyed the way that we collaborated and then worked with Megari and Emmanuel to sort of help them tell their own story. Like I wasn't expecting it to be such a sort of collaborative, fulfilling experience. But I think, you know, we're quite as documentary storytellers, we can often sort of force our own sort of storytelling styles onto something. And I think what was quite nice is as we sort of worked with Megari and Emmanuel, they were sort of quite forthcoming in sort of a couple of the scenes that we had. For example, like the scene in the helicopter hangar. Like they just sort of they were so natural in that, and they sort of came out and sort of, I don't want to say performed, but they just sort of they were really happy demonstrating what they would normally do in that. Like we sort of set
Yeah,
up
like
that.
replaying what would have happened ordinarily.
Yeah, exactly. And they were just we found them to be just really natural and great at it. Like that scene, there's a couple of other scenes as well. I mean, the scene with Megari and the ranger, like we asked them, we sort of gave them some cues to sort of start that conversation, and then they just sort of went for. I mean, that's like a tenth of the conversation that happened. They sort of chatted for ages, and in the end, we sort of like left the cameras and sort of stepped back because they were having such a natural, sort of lovely conversation. And yeah, I think that surprised me quite a lot. That how, yeah, just like really great people to work with, and just how natural that they told their own stories. And it was just our job to sort of capture that and sort of yeah, do it justice really.
Would you do something differently if you did the story again?
Oh, good question.
I
I
really like, Tom, the validation I'm getting when you say good question. but, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'd do differently. I mean, I think I included the people that I wanted to include. I think I told the story. I mean, I'd love to make a longer film and try and go out a bit more with Megari and Emmanuel to sort of try and find the chimpanzees. Like, I think that would have been. I'd love to have followed more of that story. Um, I mean, sometimes, budget limitations, time limitations. I don't think it would have been possible, but I would have loved to have gone deeper into the park and like see more of the park. I would have also loved to. I mean, as a wildlife filmmaker, for me, it's always a joy to go and actually film the wildlife, which we got to do a little bit on this. We had some lovely moments when monkeys came to Kwano Research Station, and we sort of captured little bits of that. But I would have loved to have actually attempted to film the chimpanzees, but maybe that's the next film.
I would watch that because I really loved this one. I think on the story itself, I just have one question to ask you and then would wrap up on another. I'm asking this question with knowledge that impact can be slow. Have you seen any tangible impact, maybe in policy, funding, attention? We already know in the story you said researchers where the hope was that researchers will be returning at least. Any impact? Reaction, maybe? I can record my reaction to say I loved it completely. I had questions. I've asked some of them here. What's it been like post release of this story?
Yeah, I mean, like the response has been really lovely. Everyone's sort of been really positive about it, which is great. We're still early days, I guess. Like you say,
Yeah.
impact takes a while, but I mean, we did have some immediate impacts like while we were there. What's great about the way that Mongabay work compared to how I used to work with broadcasters is like when you're working with a broadcaster, or like a streaming platform, for example, like they're very careful about everything's confidential until the release of the program. Whereas with this and the way that Mongabay work, because they're an environmental news platform and they sort of care about impact and it's sort of baked into what they do, we were able to provide the footage and the photos from that we got of the mine to African nature investors, and they took it to the governor. I think the day after we provided them the footage, and they were able to sort of have a conversation around how do they deal with that mining, um, which is obviously something which is ongoing. But as far as I'm aware, they've managed to get some more resources to help deal with that. So that was really lovely to hear and to know that we made a genuine impact while we were there.
Mhm.
But yeah, like hopefully it does come to show people a bit more of. I mean, it's such a stunning, amazing national park, and I think with a lot of what I do, awareness doesn't equate much to impact because if you're making a series about wildlife in East Africa, like everyone already sort of knows about that wildlife and about that species. What's lovely about working in a park in Nigeria is very few Nigerians, if not, let alone the world, sort of know about the biodiversity that still exists in these parks. That for me is kind of the great impact of this is conversations with Nigerians about, oh, did you know you have chimpanzees? Did you know you have gorillas? Did you know you still have elephants in Nigeria? I always really love like whenever I sort of enter and leave Nigeria and people ask what I'm doing with all this camera gear, usually like customs and people at the airport.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, I've come to film gorillas. And they're always like, gorillas or chimpanzees? And they're like, chimpanzees? We have those? I'm like, yeah. they're in Gashaka-Gumti, they're in Adamawa State, they're like this is, and you start to tell people, and people are amazed. And I think, like Nigeria has so many great different like biodiversity, like hotspots. Like you mentioned yourself, you've done some work in Cross River State. Those forests in Cross River are amazing, but so few Nigerians know about those places and the wildlife that still live there. Like I recently did a project sort of following this with Wildlife Conservation Society in Cross River and filmed forest elephants there. And like I have such joy
Forest
showing people.
elephants.
Yeah, forest
You
elephants,
have
and
to
I have.
send me that, Tom. I had no idea we still have elephants here, and I'm
Oh,
Nigerian. So
there you go. To my point. Yeah, like there's not like loads and loads left, but there's like small pockets, and
Mhm.
I think you're at that crucial place in Nigeria where like you need to protect them and get the word out while they're still there, and to get that protection in place while it's still possible to protect them. So yeah, so for me, like I have so much joy like starting these conversations with people, not and people that are outside of the conservation space in particular, that are sort of blown away by the fact that they still have elephants, chimpanzees, and gorillas and all sorts of other species in their country.
I loved the story as a local because I have never seen my country's landscape look so beautiful. I live in Lagos most of the time. I grew up here, and uh, we we know the least about the conservation, the nature of our country, the conservation efforts being done to at least keep what's left, and also how much we've lost. And it was so beautiful to see all of that greenery, that intense, magical forest, and be able to look from the helicopter view, the degradation going on through the illegal mining and the poaching, and also to hear from the workers how excited they were when they found a new species and the
Mm.
growth, maybe them having babies. It was such a lovely piece, Tom. I loved it. And I know that you do a whole lot more complex work, but that was very impactful, even for me as a local. I wanted you to know that.
Oh,
My
thank you.
final
That means a
question
lot.
is this. Oh, thank you. What have I not yet asked you that you would like to share?
I guess, like for me, the important question is like, how do we get more of these films made about Nigerian wildlife and conservation? And for me, it's a really exciting time because I'm starting to see the seeds of that industry sort of beginning in Nigeria. Like now there's like Wild Africa Fund produce a lot of really good like conservation storytelling. Their Unsung Heroes YouTube series is fantastic. Mongabay obviously like we've very kindly funded this, and we've got this out there now. Yeah, for me the question is like where do we go next? How do we get more of these made? And how do we then get Nigerian conservation storytellers the resources that they need to tell more of these stories? And I think there's a few seeds of that, and I'm starting to see Nigerian wildlife and conservation content creators. But what I'd love to see is like I'd love to see more of that getting onto like Nigerian broadcast TV. Like I know like there was like Arise News had their thing with Layla Johnson Salami. And there's like a few of those places for like environmental and conservation storytelling. But like where do we go next is my big question. I don't have the answer to that yet, but like I think there's now enough individual people that I'm starting to see sort of tell these stories. And I think it's really exciting. And I think what I would love to see in the next sort of 2-3 years is just more of these types of storytelling arise out of wild places in Nigeria and reach sort of Nigerian audiences first, but then also global audiences. Because, I think, like I said, like Nigeria has so much amazing wildlife left, so many crazy, interesting species and great biodiversity hotspots. And there are some amazing conservationists doing the work to protect them, but we need to be telling those stories. So yeah, that's my big question that I guess I'm asking myself because I have a vested interest and I want to sort of be a part of telling those stories, but I also want to be part of encouraging other Nigerian storytellers to tell those stories too.
Tom, I just want to say that when you do figure it out, or as you go on the journey figuring that out, that here in Africa Talks, we want to be part of helping you get these stories to the locals and also internationally. So always think of us as a mouthpiece that can help, have a chat about the work, and share as much of your work as possible to get people to hear it, watch it, and see it all the time. So thank you so much for spending some time with me, Tom.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Me too. Speak soon.
Thank you for listening to The Alternative, a podcast from Africa Talks Network. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms. Our executive producers are Nelly Kalu and Fola Folayo. Royalty-free music is by Melody Loops. Mixing and mastering by Nelly Kalu.